Today we're jumping into a really fascinating framework that asks a huge question. What if intelligence actually had a conscience? This is all based on the work of a scholar named Paul Yee, and it's basically a blueprint for a whole new kind of wisdom. So let's get right into it. So the whole thing kicks off with this really simple but kind of jarring question, right? We usually think being smart is always a good thing, but what happens when that brilliance is completely disconnected from any sense of morality? To make this real, this source uses a powerful example, Dr. Henry Kissinger. On one side of the ledger, you have a Harvard PhD and a Nobel Peace Prize winner. I mean, the height of intellectual achievement. But on the other side, he's accused of enabling mass violence and even called the butcher of Chile. So the core question is, how can both of these things be true about the same person? And this isn't just a vague claim. The source points to specific moments, like Kissinger's support for the '73 Chilean coup and his greenlighting of arms sales to Indonesia right before an invasion that led to, well, an absolutely staggering number of deaths. This isn't a theoretical debate. It's an example of intelligence being applied with what the source calls truly catastrophic results for humanity. And that really brings us to the first big concept here, the whole problem of intelligence without conscience. It's this idea that our society, our systems, often reward and celebrate brain power, no matter what it's used for. But this isn't just about a few powerful people making questionable choices. The source argues that this split between being smart and being good is systemic, that it's actually woven into the very fabric of how our global economy was built over centuries. So to really wrap our heads around this systemic problem, the source asks us to look back at history, and it contrasts two completely different models for how the world could do business. On one side, you have the beginnings of modern capitalism, which the source describes as straight-up piratical. It was all about violent extraction for corporate profit. But on the other side, you had a totally different approach, the Silk Road, which was built from the ground up on the idea of mutual benefit and peaceful trade. And look, the source makes it clear that the Silk Road wasn't some historical blip. We're talking about a system that lasted for 2,000 years. It survived the rise and fall of huge empires because its foundation was cooperation, not domination. It just worked.
Okay, so if that's the problem, what's the solution? This is where we get to the core proposal from the source, a big, unified framework it calls the Pedagogy of Conscience.
What's so amazing about this idea is that it isn't trying to invent something totally new. Instead, it's about synthesizing a wisdom that's been around forever, arguing that this drive for conscience is a golden thread that connects all of humanity across every culture and every era. And the source points out this incredible convergence of ideas. I mean, think about it. You've got Wang Yang in 15th century China talking about innate moral knowledge. Then, centuries later, you have Paulo Freire in Brazil exploring critical consciousness. And they even connect this to Western thinkers like Spinoza and, get this, Adam Smith, who both basically argued that morality has to come before economics. They were all climbing the same mountain from different sides. And just in case this all sounds a little too academic or philosophical, don't worry. The source gives us the absolute, perfect, simple analogy for it. At the end of the day, this whole complex framework boils down to exactly what Jiminy Cricket told Pinocchio: let your conscience be your guide. Simple as that. Okay, so we've got the why, but what about the how? How does this actually work in the real world? This next part breaks down the mechanics of the framework, and it all starts by making a huge distinction between two things we often confuse: knowledge and wisdom. So here's the engine of the whole system. The source calls it the ecological recycling of knowledge. It's a three-step process. First, raw data, raw intelligence comes into the system. But then, and this is the key part, it has to pass through a screen, a moral filter of conscience. That filter removes what the source calls dirty intelligence. And what comes out the other side? That's wisdom. Clean, fair, and ready to make the whole system better. This crucial difference is captured beautifully in these two Chinese characters. On the left, you have Ji. That's just knowledge, the raw accumulation of facts. It's neutral. It can be used for good or for bad. But on the right, you have Ji. That's wisdom. That's knowledge that has already passed through the conscience filter. And according to this framework, that makes it inherently good, clean, and fair. Okay, and this is where the framework makes its boldest, most radical proposal. What if there was a new academic standard, one that was actually higher than a PhD? It's called a Doctor of Conscience, or a PhC. And earning one wouldn't just mean you're smart, that you have knowledge. It would certify that you've demonstrated real wisdom.
So you're probably wondering, who wouldn't qualify? Well, the source doesn't pull any punches here. A PhD could never, ever be awarded to architects of war, to people who enable oppressive systems, or to anyone who lives by that ends justify the means logic. It directly challenges our current values by explicitly naming figures like Dr. Kissinger and Dr. Condoleezza Rice as examples of people whose actions would disqualify them.
Now, let's talk about the real-world stakes. I want you to just look at this number for a second. $2 trillion. That's the mind-boggling amount the source says the world spends on its militaries every single year.
And that massive number leads to a really simple but powerful question. What could we, as a species, accomplish if that money was guided by conscience? What if we just redirected it to education, to ending poverty, to actually building a shared future, instead of planning for the next conflict?
Now, I know a lot of this might still sound a little abstract, maybe a bit philosophical, but this final section, this is where it all gets incredibly real and incredibly relevant for us right now in the digital age.
The source introduces this really cool term, conscientiological efficiency. It sounds complicated, but the idea is actually pretty simple. What if we used the insane speed and accuracy of modern technology, like AI, to apply that conscience filter almost instantly? Imagine a world where lying and manipulation just stop working, because the truth can be verified in real time.
And this idea gets a name, AIWOC. That's AI plus wisdom intelligence. This is the next evolution. It's an AI that isn't just crunching raw data, that Z we talked about. It's an AI that operates on Z, that clean, fair wisdom that has already been run through a conscience-based framework. And this all leads to a pretty mind-blowing conclusion from the source. Think about it. Creating a lie, manipulating people, that stuff takes time. You have to craft the deception. But truth that's been filtered through conscience and supercharged by technology, can be instantaneous. The sheer speed of an AI with wisdom could make those old Machiavellian tactics literally computationally impossible.
So that's where we'll leave it, with one final, really important question for all of us to think about. As artificial intelligence gets smarter and faster than we can possibly imagine, is our uniquely human capacity for conscience not just our moral compass, but maybe our last and greatest strategic advantage?